Welcome to Fun with Annuities with your host, me, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent. Can annuities be fun? Can contractual guarantees be fun? Absolutely they can. Find out the brutal facts about annuities with no sales pitches or high-pressure nonsense. Just the brutal and factual annuity truth, which is all you need to hear. Let's have some fun with annuities, and let's have that fun start right now. Welcome to Fun with Annuities. I'm your host, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent. Boy, do we have a cool guest today. He goes by the moniker of the Retirement Answer Man, which rhymes with the Annuity Man. So it kind of between the two of us, I think we got it covered. His name is Roger Whitney. Boy, has he got a lot going on. He has a podcast. He's written a book. He's got a club that you can join. He's got a free newsletter, all that stuff. And we'll have that on my site at theannuityman.com, because all of our celebrity guests like this get their own page on my site to where you can go and link to their site and learn about who they are. But superstar stuff here. Young, vibrant, smart, heady. I mean, he's the guy, man. If I still drank beer, this would be the guy that I'd say, hey, let's go get a beer. But hey, Roger, thanks for joining me on Fun with Annuities.
And you're going to send me a clip of that for my daily affirmation, I hope.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, I'm a motivational / annuity expert. So, Roger, tell the people about you. I mean, your journey to the Retirement Answer Man, you know, is never planned. It happens, right? You know, you don't wake up in the morning and go, you know what? I'm going to trademark Retirement Answer Man, and that's who I'm going to be. I'm glad
I remember when I first, because our podcast, which has been going for about 8 years, was originally called Plan Well, Invest Wisely, which really doesn't say anything to anybody. And then a gentleman that I actually learned some podcasting from, the Podcast Answer Man. I was at a conference and I was talking to him, and like, why don't I just call it the Retirement Answer Man? So I talked to him about it. He got it from the Bible Answer Man, who was an old school publisher of some sort. And I remember when I named it, and this is 8 years ago, it felt a little uncomfortable. It felt a little arrogant, because it's not like I got all the answers. And I didn't want to be that person that acted like they did have all the answers. But then I'm like, okay, if I do this, I have to lean into it, and it's going to make me go pro and be more intentional about what I actually do. So that's how the name came about. But you're right. I mean, when you get to be, I'm 55, when you get to, you have a lot of different incarnations of who you are, which is, I think, how a lot of people feel as they near, you know, we'll call it retirement, I guess.
Yeah, when you pass that 50 mark, you know, things start getting weird and start getting real at the same time. How'd you get here? I mean, where are you from? Where'd you go to school? You know, did you wake up in the morning and go, I like money, let's talk about finances? Tell us that story.
I think it was more of how we all grow up. For most people I know anyway. I went to Michigan State.
Go Spartans.
Go Spartans. Spartian. I met my wife there. I was a bartender. She was a waitress, and then moved to Texas after graduation, just because she had moved down there to follow her family. And the way I got into being a financial advisor, which is other than one little beginning job out of college, is all I've ever done. It's not that fancy of a story. I hated what I did. I was bored. I had a buddy that did it. I'm like, okay, I'll try that. I mean, that's about the science behind it. And so for the first 8 years of my life, started in 90, I had really bad mentors, not knowing, because I was just a young kid. And all I did was trade technology stocks for 8 years in the 90s, which was a great thing to do.
Sure.
Even if you didn't know what you were doing, because the markets were so nice. And then around 87, 89, I knew this isn't what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And so I started to get my certified financial planner certificate, and I've gotten a number of other advanced planning designations, and then just have kept reinventing myself as I've discovered what I'm supposed to be doing with my life, which is never revealed to you in one instance.
Is it a passion? Do you wake up in the morning with a passion to inform, educate, and simplify the world of money and retirement? Is that what you're on the planet for?
Definitely. So fast forward in '03, I started an independent firm with two partners.
Hmm.
And then over 15 years, we grew that to about 15 people, 12, 15 people. And I had gotten to this point in my 40s when in a business, if you've been an entrepreneur or understand entrepreneurism, you sort of have this flat line that you hit this hockey stick where
Yeah.
your cash flow goes up, but your
Right.
overhead stays roughly the same. And we had hit that spot, and I was doing triathlons and adventure races in my mid 40s. And I, I don't, whatever you want to call it, like, is this what my life is going to be? I could take care of my family, do some cool trips. Is
Sure.
this what I'm supposed to be doing? And so that's when I hired my first professional coach. And what haunts me is I don't want to get to be 70 and say, what could I have done? And so so when I started the podcast, it was really a personal exploration of finding my voice and what do I really believe in? And so I just kept iterating. Because I think out loud. So that's the reason I started a podcast. It was pretty selfish. I just wanted to think out loud and start to form what my opinion and view was of financial planning, retirement, what the goals are really during this stage of life, because that's, what I
Hmm.
was exposed to with clients. So yeah, totally. This is where I'm supposed to be.
For anyone that forgot who this was, Roger Whitney, and he has all kinds of stuff. His Retirement Answer Man podcast is fantastic. We'll obviously have that link. You need to go, review that, listen to the past episodes, follow him on the current ones. You wrote a book called Rock Retirement, and there's a Rock Retirement Club. I want you to kind of go into the book. What was the motivation behind that? Because it's not your typical retirement book. It really kind of delves into what I call, there's no U-Hauls behind hearses. You need to maximize the day, live for the day, find out, you've accumulated all this money. Now what? You just can't watch it and pull up your bank account every day, even though a lot of people do that. Where did the Rock Retirement idea come from? And then could you go into the Rock Retirement Club and what that entails?
Yeah. So I think there are two retirement crises happening right now. There's a one that we know about, which is there's a lot of people that don't have enough money to pay the bills when they can't work anymore. That's the one that we know about. And that's a big one.
Yep.
There's another retirement crisis that feels it's not talked about as much because it's sort of weird to talk about it because it seems like stop whining. And that's the crisis of people that have been blessed, but also have done a lot of things right for a long time. And then they get to the stage of life where they can have more time freedom, which is really what retirement is. It's not retirement like grandpa's retirement. That's how we think of it, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a crisis with people that have a lot of options in that they're like a bodybuilder that have gotten really strong upper body, but no legs. They know how to accumulate. They have this system of affirmation, of saving and investing and seeing it grow and being a good steward. And then they get to retirement and they don't know how to harvest what they've accumulated. And they're so worried about the future, what their 80 or 90-year-old self is going to deal with. And they don't have a good framework to know that they'll be okay. So they just keep saving and denying themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's a crisis, a different kind of crisis, not as visceral as I don't have enough money. So I don't want to diminish that
Mm-hmm.
relative to this. But there's a lot of people that are in this position. And what has happened in my view, Stan, is when I was teaching the retirement planning section for the CFP certificate program, Certified Financial Planner Certificate Program.
Mm-hmm.
In my view, traditional classical financial planning doesn't solve for this. Classical financial planning focuses on what a number is. It's all within the calculator because we're all financial geeks. That's how the certification was created. And for most people, there isn't a financial dilemma. There's a dilemma of vision and spirit of what they want for their life. Um, and I think that's a big crisis for a good number of people.
It is. I call it the middle class scars, where we have generations that grew up, during the Depression, and then they passed on those middle class scars to their kids. I always talk about, say going to McDonald's and my dad's standing there, and I order the large fry, and he looks at me like I just, committed the ultimate sin. Why would you ever order the large fry? But I think a lot of people suffer from the standpoint that they can't spend it. There's something that's in the way of them actually enjoying their money. You said a word that popped out at me during that explanation, and I want you to dig deeper in. And the word was harvest. Can you go deeper when you say harvest? What does that mean to the retiree?
Well, let's use that metaphor. You sow and sow and sow. That's your saving and investing and denying yourself and betting on the markets over decades, that compounding that creates a bountiful harvest. And then reaping might be the better word, right? When you're retiring, the whole point of all of this reaping was to use this to create a vision of your life. Once you've raised the family, you've filled your work obligations, and you've taken care of that. When you retire, that's when you have the most time freedom. Let's think about a normal retiree right now, right? They're going to live longer than any generation in history. They're going to, at least the segment we're talking about, they're going to have money to be able to do things. And they're going to be healthier than any generation. I know we see statistics that they're not, but the modern retiree, when they retire, they don't envision themselves sitting on the park bench of life. They envision themselves in the playground, and they finally have the time to go explore and do the things that they want to do, or at least discover them if they don't know what they are.
Sure.
That's what all of this money is for. And classical financial planning focuses on denying them that, because the numbers on the longevity and the possibility of long-term care and your 80 or 90-year-old self is so uncertain because of inflation, markets, whatever, that it always defaults to decisions to deny yourself today. And if you think of, I think of a teeter-totter. So when you're making these decisions, you want to have your best great life today on one end. And on the other end, you want to be okay when you're 80 or 90. And there's a tension between those two things. And you're standing on the middle of that teeter-totter trying to balance that. And unfortunately, the majority of planning, which feeds the mindset of this very uncertain world, is always going to default to denying today. And that's not right, because tomorrow isn't promised to anyone. You got to be a good steward. But what I have observed, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, Stan, at walking this journey with clients over decades, they've been denying themselves almost unconsciously. And then they get to a point in their 80s or whatever point is, they realize, oh my goodness, I'm going to have more money than I need. And it's like a tipping point. And then you start to get, well, crap, what could I have done? What trips could I have done? What gifts could I have bestowed? And so they're denying a blessing to the world in how they live it or in the gifts they give monetarily. And then they end up being older with too much money and then just trying to give it away or just let the estate figure it out.
I think that's what I found is, been through the similar journey with you, worked with Dean Witter and Morgan Stanley, Payne Weber, UBS. So went through all of that. And that's where I cut my teeth for decades. But what I find with people out here, and I only work in contractual guaranteed space, fixed annuities, is I tell people, let's take this step first. And the step is let's cover your income floor. That income amount that you need every month to hit every single month, Social Security, pension if you're so fortunate, dividend stock, side hustle, annuity gap filling, whatever that is. Once we solve that, and I found out once we can solve that income floor for people, they don't worry as much. They're better investors, they're better stewards, they live their life more. But most people are worried about that lifetime income component without being affected by markets or geopolitical events, et cetera. Once we can put that in place, which is really the reason annuities were even put on the planet, even though there's many different types, but they're primarily solve for lifetime income as long as you're breathing. What I found is once we get that income floor in place and they understand how we solve for inflation in the future, we just reverse engineer a SPIA, immediate annuity quote, to solve for that increase when they need it, then they're off and running. So I look at it a little bit differently, that if we can solve that one fear, and most people have that fear of paying the bills, whether they have $1 million, $10 million, or $100,000. And once we do that, they're better investors, they're happier, they're lighter in their step. So that's just from my myopic space and the lane that I'm in, which is the annuity man. That's what I see people getting over the hump of those middle class scars of not being able to spend money. You know?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Stan. And that isn't a financial optimized formula. It's a life optimized formula, right? Mm-hmm. To give themselves, for someone to give themselves permission to do things, mm-hmm. knowing that they have this base there. And I have come around to that over the last 2 or 3 years, because mm-hmm. Traditionally how I grew up in my experience with annuities is nasty. It was this manufactured junk food.
Well, right? A lot of products are like that,
yeah.
and we've earned the industry has earned its bad reputation.
So as advisors, right?
Yeah.
Because of how they've used things like that.
Sure.
And so I think that I've heard different terms for what you're talking about, right? I've heard the minimum dignity floor. I personally like, I personally like the base great life
Yep.
So you can insure against basically insure against the base great life with these income mm-hmm. streams. Mm-hmm. And on the like in our planning process, we begin with building the income floor on the front end. So when a client mm-hmm. retires, they have the first 5 years of consumption paid for and de-risked. So it's essentially the using cash-like things for an annuity on the front end, and then you can do the tail end as well. Mm-hmm. But I think that is one thing I have found, like with the Rock Retirement Club, where we have over 800 people all in this phase of life. For about 3 years, I had office hours where I'd have one-on-one conversations, not to give advice, but to listen and help be a decision-making partner. Mm-hmm. And one thing that really surprised me, was unexpected, Stan, and this goes to your point, was the vast majority of these sessions were people searching for permission to do the things that they want to do. Mm-hmm. It was about feeling safe that they can do it without hurting themselves. Which goes to your point of, this is much more of a crisis of faith and belief and structure than it is a math problem for the people that we're talking about now, right? Mm-hmm. It's much, and that's sad, but that's also encouraging, because that means that for those that have been blessed and done the things right to have these choices, if we can bring via annuities or income floors mm-hmm. or perspective in their decision making, if we can bring these guideposts, this can help free them to be able to harvest, to be able to use their bounty to help their family, help the world, create memories. That's well beyond the math, and that's stuff that we don't talk about mostly as financial planners, because we like numbers and we like investments.
Well, and it's hard for people that I find to transfer risk. Annuities are transfer of risk products. We can obviously structure them so that they'll pay you if you die early, all of the money that's unused goes to the family. That's one of the biggest misconceptions out there. But as long as you're breathing, you're going to get a payment. And so it's the only product that can do that. But a lot of people have a hard time transferring that risk and allocating that money to an irrevocable lifetime income stream, which leads to the fact that it has to be in proportion and allocated properly so it makes sense. But I always tell people, you already have two annuities. One Social Security. The other one is what I call a forced annuity, and that's RMDs, required minimum distribution. That literally functions like an annuity because it's the IRS tapping you on the shoulder and say, yeah, we need a payment. We need a payment. We need a payment, And so,
and you're going to have to manage the risk of those potential RMDs. So they're going to end up being cash-like anyway.
Correct. So once people get their arms around, I hate all annuities. Damn. Okay, great. You own them too. Most people do that. If you have an IRA and you have Social Security number, you own two. Do you need more? I don't know. But I think that flipping through Rock Retirement book, it was more about you trying to teach people to get their arms around their specific situation to make a sound decision that will put them in a better place mentally, not financially because they're already there, but mentally so that they can go live their life. Did I get the synopsis of that right?
Yeah, I wrote the book a specific way. When I'm not naturally a writer, which is probably evident, but I bought almost any retirement book I could find and read them. Mm-hmm. And what I found was many of them well-written, very specific, very technical, but everything is focused on tactics. Right. Do I do Roth IRAs? Do I buy the annuity? Do I do this specific thing? Which is natural because that's where individuals naturally live. Mm-hmm. If I have a pain on my arm, I had a pinched nerve in my neck. I just wanted it to go away. And my first instinct, go to the doctor, get an MRI and figure out what surgery you need. Right. That was all tactical because I wanted this to go away because it was horrible. And so we live there. So a lot of the things that we hear about when it comes to retirement planning are all tactical things of what we should think about. Very little is strategic. I'll use my neck example. So as I went to the doctor, he actually gave me a script to go get an MRI. And I said, wait a second here. I'm going to give this 3 months and what's my strategy to avoid these tactical solutions? Mm-hmm. And that was rest, stretching. And that was about it. And time, rather than just go have the doctor give me something to make it go away. And over time, it went away. So everything we do, everything I'm about from an agile retirement management standpoint is organized decision-making that puts things in the right order so we can think through things in an organized way. And you know this, Stan, but here's a secret. You can't figure this out. Mm-hmm. If you're 60, you can't figure out how this is all going to work and plan for it. You just can't. There's too many unknowns and variables in your life as well as the market. So anybody that tells you they have the solution is lying to you.
I always tell people there's no perfect answers, just bad sales pitches. And everything's customizable. So it really comes down to the specific person. I wanted to go ahead.
So when you're thinking, I just want to make sure I hit this point because this goes to your question, is everything that we talk about in the process is what do we want? Create a strategy that makes that feasible because you might have to negotiate with yourself. Mm-hmm. And then once you have a feasible strategy, how do we make it resilient so you don't get knocked off course? And then you get down to the tactics. So everybody wants to start tactics. Where does this fit? Is it feasible? Right. Get a good strategy, make it resilient, and then you can get to all the fancy tactical stuff.
I like that. I hope that the financial planning world is starting to morph a little bit more into that as the older financial planners age out and the younger ones come in, that they're more attuned to that. Because I think with the demographic tidal wave of 10,000 baby boomers plus turning 65 every day, it's not just about tactics. It's about advising people both on the money side and the psychological side and the lifestyle side to put it all together so a plan works for them. But there is no cookie cutter Monte Carlo simulation that's gonna solve for that. I wanted to dig more into the Rock Retirement Club. What was the impetus for putting that together? Obviously, you wrote the book. And then you go, was that clients and people pulling you toward that, or did you have an idea that, hey, this might be a space where people can interact? Tell us a little bit more about that cost, how people get involved with that. We'll have the link on our site for that.
Yeah, it's about 3.5 years old, and it was, my life has changed in a lot of ways when I associate myself with certain kinds of people. And so we had thought about it. So we just surveyed the podcast, and we did a survey. Hey, we're thinking about doing this. Would you have an interest in that? What would you like to see? What wouldn't you like to see? And we were blown away by the response. We got, almost 1,000 responses answering our questions on the survey.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was interesting. So, but I didn't feel like I had enough information. So what I did was I asked one of my teammates hey, I want to talk to some of these people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up talking to about 80 people over 2 days for about 5 to 10 minutes each. And I had a couple specific questions, and I got those answered. But after I went through that gauntlet over 2 days, what I really came away with, Stan, was, one, all these people are super nice. They're in the same stage of life, and they're wicked smart. And they all would like each other if they were around each other.
Mm-hmm.
It literally brought me to tears. I'm like, okay, these people would love each other. So when we started the club, it was purely an experiment. We started with 20 people and just, let's figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the pillars of the Rock Retirement Club now is it's filling a space in our mind between doing it on your own and just going on the internet, trying to find information and putting it together, or hiring a financial planner or advisor, which typically is going all in with somebody, has, cost involved in that. And there's not a lot in between where you can do it on your own, but not be by yourself. Mm-hmm. And other than a few sources, Stan, there really isn't any place you can go to get world-class education on how to actually do retirement that it doesn't have a sales pitch attached to it.
No doubt. Absolutely true.
And so we created the Rock Retirement Club as a safe place. So there's never an upsell. You pay, you get everything. And I'm not accepting clients. I'm not using it to grow the business. So what we created was what we feel is world-class education on how you actually put together your plan, tools to be able to execute, and then coaching in group form to learn from each other, as well as Andy Panko, who is on your show. He's a coach in the club, and others, from really quality people on taxes, on lifestyle, on putting together your paycheck, and then also learning from the community, because we got a lot of wicked smart people. And if you're trying to do something, there's been somebody that's already walked that path. And
it has a Bogleheads flair to it, but sounds a little bit more hip. Not to say Bogleheads aren't hip.
Well, it's all about how do we make organized decision. And I think the key, I've never really been on Bogleheads. We talk about investment strategy, but not specifics. Mm-hmm. It's a safe place in that we don't talk politics. We have a code of conduct where we're all trying to help each other and have productive conversations and not going down rabbit holes. And we enforce that pretty heavily. Mm-hmm. So it's a comfortable place, we have spreadsheet geeks, but we have people that don't know what a spreadsheet is. And so the goal is to help in a group way, walk with people that are on the same journey, that have the same spirit, so we can all help each other.
It's a community. I think it's a great idea. We did something similar on Facebook. We have what's called the Annuity Lovers Club, which is a monitored club to where people can come in and ask questions about annuities without some hater, saying never buy an annuity, just going off, So it's a safe space, and it sounds similar to what you're doing, but retirement as a whole is such a broader piece. I mean, obviously annuities is just one piece and it doesn't fit everyone's situation. I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about current events, because, we're on all major podcast platforms like yours, and we have Fun with Annuities YouTube channel, and everyone's always wanting to know where your brain is on current events. And not that you have all the answers, but you have a high IQ, and they're interested to hear your insight, because, at the time of this taping, there's a lot going on. there's war, there's inflation, serious inflation. There's an upcoming midterm at the time of this taping. I know that you don't get caught in the weeds, but a lot of people do. What's your advice to people that are just worried? Because I get those calls all the time. Hey, Stan, what do you think about X? Or, hey, Stan, how do we deal with this? Or, hey, Stan, should we be concerned? What are your answers to some of the things that's going on? And something's always going on, actually.
That last sentence is the key to it all. There's
Mm-hmm.
always something going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's no way to live your life. Do I worry about Ukraine? Do I worry about inflation? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I worried about TARP and TARP 2 and all the quantitative easing. Just like I worried about the tech bust. I mean, I don't have an opinion. And I don't think I need to have an opinion. So we use an agile process. So we've taken agile project management and applied it to retirement planning.
Okay.
And the question I'm getting a lot is inflation. Should I change my assumptions in my plan? Because inflation is spiking. I saw the gentleman, I can't recall his name, that did this study on the 4% rule back in the day. He just had an article.
Wade Fowle just did one. Wade Fowle did a kind of a deep dive into the 4% rule.
Yeah. Well, the gentleman who did the original study back in the 80s just had an article in the Wall Street Journal.
I didn't see that. Okay.
Yeah, I can't recall his name. And he was reducing his retirement spending because he's worried about inflation.
Okay.
But it's in the Wall Street Journal, so I don't want to over summarize the article. That is not a way to live a life.
Agreed.
Do we have to be aware of it? Yes, but I don't change assumptions hardly at all on anything, whether it's inflation, on market expectations, because all you're doing is trying to predict the future. I don't use forecasted returns. I've gotten into some fun exchanges with people that forecast investment returns and change withdrawal rates. I think that's all a waste of time because you can't predict the future. So I don't spend any time trying to handicap what the future is going to be. I spend all of my time on how do we have lots of little conversations. So as reality unfolds, we can make little adjustments to our plan. So once you have a plan of record is what we call it, Stan. Now you have context where you've created a feasible plan and you've made it resilient so you don't get knocked off course easy, either by life or inflation or markets. And then you optimize it best you can. But from there, that's the beginning of the journey. That gives you the context so you don't have to read the news every day. Because when you retire, you shouldn't have any worry about the first 5 years of how your life is actually going to work. That should be pretty clear because you pre-funded your consumption. And then long term, maybe you pre-funded your base great life with annuities or whatever. From there, if you do that work, then you can have little conversations. And as life unfolds, whether it's changes in inflation or changes in your life circumstance, or probably the biggest change we're going to see overall is I've changed my mind. I said I wanted this. I actually want that. That's actually the thing that's going to change the most in your retirement. When you have these little conversations, you're refreshing the plan. Is it still feasible? Is it still resilient? And then what's the biggest opportunity or the biggest risk that I should focus on next? And how can I take one action to either mitigate that risk or take advantage of the opportunity? And you do this in an incremental, iterative way. So you're focused on making decisions so you can navigate as life unfolds rather than freaking out about potential inflation forever, which nobody can predict or handicap. I think it's a waste of time.
I told someone the other day that, they're in their late 60s. I'm like, how much longer do you plan on watching cable news and keeping up with the news? And it kind of floored them. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you've been watching it for 20 years, probably 30 years. At what point are you going to realize that it's just noise and you just got to move on with your life? I think that that's a big problem. Just the clickbait, the stuff that's on the internet, and people just going down the rabbit hole. I was talking to a nice lady the other day, and she brought up something that was a conspiracy theory. I'm like, where are you getting your information? And it just tells me that they don't have a plan in place. They don't have a legitimate roadmap to what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. And I think that leads into your book. I think it leads into your club. I think it leads into your whole overview of how you approach retirement. I do love your podcast, and you do dig into specific products and you give your opinion on that. What have you found people gravitate toward, or do they influence your decision making on what you're going to talk about, or how does that come about with the podcast? Because I love it. It can be very specific on ETFs, et cetera, or it can be broad based.
Yeah, we do monthly themes. And so the theme next month is in May 2022 is functional health, which is very different than health and exercise. Mm-hmm. Functional health is, how do I set myself up to pick up my grandchild when I'm 80 or 75 or whatever the age is, right? It's a very different kind of health. In February, we did a month on inflation. So the way that I've used the podcast is, one, I practice, I work with clients. I'm having these conversations in the club with over 800 people. We're all having conversations. So I'm hearing what people are thinking about. Mm-hmm. And then so that influences. And the other thing that influences, I'll use inflation as an example, because that was in February, is the reason I do month-long series is because it's my way of refreshing my thinking and thinking through it in an organized way. So I use it as a vehicle for me to refresh my thinking, to sharpen my saw, so I don't get stale in my, decisions I've made in my past.
Has there been anything new or an epiphany or a lightning bolt that hit you during that monthly process that you weren't expecting, that became something that is now fact within your, within how you approach things? Can you remember anything like that?
And this isn't because I'm on Stan the Annuity Man show, but I haven't done the refresh in a while. But I did a month-long series on annuities. Okay, this is maybe a year and a half ago, mm-hmm. And because I have my biases against, mm-hmm. Especially being agile, mainly my bias. So I did a month-long series of what are they, how do they fit, and then which ones fit best if you were going to use them. What are the use case and for whom? Good. And during that process, and in the first episode, I'm like, hey, I'm going to tell you, I got a bias, and this is what it is, and this is why. Sure. But from that process, they have come into the toolbox as something that can be used, and we now have frameworks as to who does it make sense for, and how are they used. Sure. And that was very different than how I had started.
And I think a lot of people, when you see TV, I'd say, I hate all annuities, or I'd rather enter the gates of hell than own an annuity. And, it takes people like me out here screaming into the hurricane to say, no, that's not true. Let's look at the facts. Let's break it down a little bit, and go from there. What do you think about the current wirehouse type model with brokers and advisors selling specific products or things like that, and where the financial planning world is headed? Can they both coexist, or do you see one going away? Because in my personal opinion, having worked for the wirehouse firms, that's an interesting model that I'm not sure is sustainable unless they change it drastically. What's your thought on that?
I don't think about it much, but from an industry standpoint, I think that, I don't know timing, but where I think we're going to go is that a true financial planner is going to become coupled with a life planner. And the problem with financial planning and in financial advisors in general, and this is going to sound weird, is that the hub of everything are investments and money. That's the hub of which all processes lead back to.
Right.
And especially in retirement planning, that's a horrible hub because it's what we talked about. The hub should be what type of life, how do I live my best life so I can be on my deathbed with the least amount of regrets? That should be the hub of everything in retirement planning. And financial planning and retirement planning have investments as the hub. And so I think the future of financial counsel is going to be less about the money as the hub and the person's life as the hub. And we're going to be agnostic to investments or products from a compensation standpoint. We're going to be paid directly by the client, whether it's retainer like Andy
Like
Panko
Andy,
does, whatever it is, because we're going to be decision-making partners around lots of decisions, financial and non-financial. And you can't do that as easily if you have investments as the hub. That's where we're going.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think the younger generations coming behind us, or maybe our generation, are more open to that and more open to that model. Because I think as the younger generations are more open to, using a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I think that it's not as taboo as it is with, say, like my mom, who would, she would never consider that for whatever reason. It's probably generational, but I think you're right. And I think it's going to be, it's like everything else. It can't stay the same. It's got to improve and morph into what's pro-consumer, not what the companies want to happen to the consumer. And the financial business is like the last bastion of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, the difficulty, I think, Stan, is the financial services industry is at its core a distribution system.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a financial planning structure. So the industry is about distribution of product. And so how do you take a distribution system and make it about the client? I don't know. We'll let the markets figure that out. But in the problem with going this direction, I think from the firms that you talk about is that is not easy to scale. It's not easy to scale personal planning with someone and being a decision-making partner with someone where, Andy knows this for sure. Andy Panko, who was on your show a month or so ago, is a lot of financial advisors can't do any tax thinking or talking. They can't do any tax planning.
True.
Especially at the large firms. And in retirement, that's probably financially one of the biggest levers that you can pull to impact your life. So I don't know how all that works. I personally think that, and this is part of my life mission, whatever you want to call it, is the agile process is going to become the standard financial planning process, because the traditional financial planning process is focused on the wrong things and too bloated. It's not engaging to people.
You might have just answered the question I'm getting ready to ask, but I want you to dig in deeper. 20 years from now, where is Roger Whitney? And what is Roger Whitney? Is Roger Whitney still doing this at a much larger level? Where do you see yourself? What's the I know we live life for the day, but when we're on this podcast 20 years from now, what's happened between those?
So I'll be 75 20 years from now.
You'll be rolling, man. You'll be rolling.
So my rabbit in this case is a gentleman named Dan Miller.
Okay.
Who wrote 48 Days to the Work You Love, New York Times bestseller. I've known him for a good period of time. He's a good friend. And he's 70, sorry, Dan, I'm not sure, 72, 73. Okay. And he and his wife, Joanne, have the marriage I want to have with my wife when I'm in my 70s. He is more alive and more entrepreneurial than he's ever been. So where am I going to be? The club will be the core of everything. And when I think of the club and the future of the Rock Retirement Club, it's how do we all help each other? The motto of the club is a psalm: walk with the wise, become wise. Is nice. How do we walk together with people and help each other make decisions and actually operationalize rocking retirement. Because in financial planning, there's lots of information about things you should think about, but there's nothing that actually shows you how to do it. So as an example, we're about to release our first decision pod. That's a complement to the masterclass that helps people create their major plan. And that is, how do I manage long-term care?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not an education course on what is long-term care, what are all the things. There's a little bit of that, but it's really a process and tools to think through the decision for yourself so you can do it in an organized way, and then you can get to the spot where you make a judgment. So that's where we're going, is how do we help people actually do this and make these decisions? Yeah, that's where.
And the resources section of Roger's site is unbelievable. I mean, it's I'm assuming that's where a lot of that's going to be, in addition to the membership into the Rock Retirement Club, which I think is I like the background to that. I think that's very, very cool. So we're kind of coming up to the end of the podcast, because I think we've covered a lot, and I certainly would like to have you on in the future to dig in, give us some updates on Rock Retirement and where you're headed. But as I do with all of my celebrity guests, at the very end, I give you the mic drop moment, which is, I'm going to throw you the mic. You're going to say something unbelievably cool and heady, and then you're going to drop it, and then we're going to finish it up. So mic drop moment, Roger Whitney, AKA the Retirement Answer Man, go.
The one thing that is lacking most for many people is hope. When they're retirement, they're so worried about the future and making sure they're okay that they're just hoping they survive it and can have some fun along the way. But to really have hope, you need three things. And these are three things get robbed of people in retirement, especially if they lose their job. The first thing you need to have hope is you need to have an inspiring goal, a vision of a better state for yourself in the future. The second thing you need to have hope is agency. The belief that you actually have some ability to act to make that future state for yourself so. And in retirement, we get a lot of our agency robbed. We feel like we're at the whim of the world. And the last thing that you need to have hope are pathways, not just one, but pathways where you can apply your agency depending on how life unfolds. And I think those are the things that we generally get robbed of in retirement. We just hope we survive it. But if we can have an inspiring goal and we can actually have agency, that we have some control over it, and we can have a framework of decision-making so we can actually apply that agency to work to this better life, that's how you rock retirement.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Roger Whitney. He's the Retirement Answer Man. And if you didn't think he was before that statement, then game, set, match, in my opinion. I want to thank everyone on all major podcast platforms for joining us today on Fun with Annuities, and the people that are watching Roger and I on the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to Fun with Annuities. Please hit the subscribe button and make sure to go to my site at theannuityman.com, where you can run your own SPIA, DIA, and QLAC quotes and see a live feed of the best MIGA fixed rates in the country, and even get indexed and income rider quotes as well. You can also sign up for my 6 Annuity Owner's Manual books, and I'll ship them for free and under no obligation. I also encourage you to schedule a one-on-one call with me, Stan the Annuity Man, so we can have a full discussion of your specific situation. It will be the best brutally factual and truthful advice you will ever get, and that's one guarantee you should definitely take advantage of. So join me next time for the #1 annuity podcast on the planet, Fun with Annuities.